So we've seen software vendors being more aggressive than they have been in the past. We've sort of seen the nuts and bolts of the case between SAP and Diageo. And it's really important because there are hordes of new software deployment and delivery techniques, each of which impacts licensing and the license scope laws in their own way. So, and this is a complete clutter of TLAs, and they're all a puzzle. But for me, the kind of light went on when a techie with a client says, you know, it's only blip until you realise that it's software. And then when you realise it's software, sort of the penny drops. But there are lots of new deployment and delivery techniques. And the reason that SAP and Diageo matters is because all these impact licensing, and they will all, in the next few years, start to work together so that software will interact and work with many, many different types of software systems. So we're not only looking at these new deployment and delivery techniques in licensing terms, sort of within their own four corners, but we're going to be starting to see how they're going to be working and interacting with each other. So how a particular bit of software works with something in a completely different constellation. So we'll be going through these, not in a lot of detail, but really to sort of give an overview and then sort of pull them back at the end. So the cloud is maturing. Businesses' workloads are going increasingly into the cloud. Anything as a service. So, and the way to look at this is to look at the sort of software infrastructure as a stack with networking and storage and kit at the bottom going through various levels of software up to the data that the software processes. And this stack here starts off on the left-hand side with all the elements of the stack being carried out by the customer on their premises as a license in the sort of old world. And then gradually, as bits of the stack migrate to the cloud, you end up on the right-hand side with software as a service, which is basically where the only thing that the customer is putting in is the data, and the cloud service provider, the CSP, is providing network storage, servers, virtualization, all the platform software, and even the application. Moving back, you have a platform as a service, which is Azure and AWS, where the customer is putting some of its own applications onto the software, and the rest of the stack is being provided by the CSP. And then infrastructure, which is the sort of the first step working back, is where the provider, the CSP, provides the infrastructure, and then the customer provides the platform software and the application software and the data. Now, in the cloud, you're moving from a license agreement, which may be perpetual or time limited, to a service. So, and all these things are being provided as a service. But software use may be provided as a service, so you need to access the software where it's being provided. And in this world of license scope clauses, particularly if you're using infrastructure or platform as a service, and the stuff that you're putting into the cloud interacts with other software, you need to have a think about what it's going to be working with. So the key for this sort of series of slides, I've just put a number, and we'll circulate the slide deck afterwards. But it's just a number of key licensing issues. In the cloud, a lot of it's around data. But when you're looking at software as a service and platform as a service, are you restricted in using the cloud service in what you can do with the software? To what extent does the license scope or the use parameters in the service agreement permit licensing with other systems? So the cloud is hugely important at the moment. The three big CSPs, Google, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft with 365 and Azure, their data centers, which are already huge, there'll be increasing capacity by 10 times over the next 5 years. I mean, this is an extraordinary scale business, and it will affect all businesses. So if we're looking at license use generally, bear in mind that what you may be doing on-prem today, you may be doing on a service agreement in the cloud tomorrow. So the next thing is artificial intelligence. Don't want to go into this in a lot of detail. It's basically machine learning, which is, in our world, is training data sets and machine learning software, and then training the AI software, and then applying these very, very much larger data sets by way of sort of a workload. Machine perception is machine learning plus sensors. Machine control is machine perception plus actuation, so the ability to navigate the landscape. Internet of Things is classic machine perception. Autonomous vehicles is classic machine control. And again, this is all based on software, and it will all becoming much more important in the next 2 to 5 years. AI, good example in our world, in the law firm world, where what we're seeing is sort of AI with 4 bits, if you like, a natural language interface so that you can tell it what to do, you don't need to type it in, training data sets and machine learning, as we've talked about, and then an element of cognition, so the software will come back with ranked answers, and you can tell it, well, actually, I think number 3 is right, not number 1 or 2 because of this case, and that will be programmed into the software for the next time that it thinks about it. And it's suitable for supporting, again, in our world, repetitive, process-intensive, standardizable componentry of higher value legal services, so due diligence, e-discovery, contract assembly, property reports on title, that sort of thing. It's really, really difficult to do, and for lawyers, particularly in private practice, who have this sort of culture of perfection, to be able to work like techies, which is sort of scratching your head and iterative and just tinkering about it till it works, really difficult, but people will be getting there in the next couple of years. Key licensing and contracting issues. At the moment, it's kind of writing up the project, statement of work type stuff. Ownership of data inputs and outputs. And I was speaking with someone during the break who said that the SAP license, by seeking to bring under the umbrella of the license scope, displaying data, and sort of starting to overreach software into the data. So how data is used here is particularly important. With AI, we're starting to get into the realms of computer-generated inventions and computer-generated software. So ownership of software starts to become much more important. Just pausing here for the first time, you can have AI in a cloud environment as well as AI on premises. And I think Raven and Kira have their own, which are sort of legal AI providers, have their own cloud services as well. So as well as thinking about what we were looking at on the previous slide around cloud, in an AI context, when you're in the cloud, you need to think about this as well. And a function of these new deployment and delivery techniques is how they all start to interact with each other. So the third one of these new techniques is robotic process automation, which is basically replacing stuff that people do in the business process sense with stuff that software does. So it replaces people processes with software processes. And this is at a pretty early stage at the moment, but it's quite powerful, and it's going to start to becoming much more mainstream over the next couple of years. And the phases, again, I won't go into this in a lot of detail, but a sort of an element of consultancy and professional services to sort of figure out how to map the people processes to the software processes. Then there's the implementation phase. And then you have this the software tools that are licensed to execute these new software processes. And it's particularly here that with your RPA software, you can think about that software interacting very widely with many other software systems. So at the moment, if you think about what just take accounts payable or accounts receivable, and you think of all the steps in those processes, and how the people doing that at the moment can interact with different software at different points along the trajectory. And when RPA is doing this, and will do this, that RPA software will be interacting directly or indirectly with many other software systems. And as we saw in SAP and Diageo, that was what this overuse case was all about. And basically, SAP was saying, you've got to pay us twice as much as you thought you had to 100 million instead of 50 million. So particularly here, the contracting issues, the key contracting issues are the interaction of the software processes with other software systems, but maybe it's several removes. And how do you sort of plan this? How do you map this? It probably means that you need to be looking at slightly shorter contracts to make sure that you're not using it in a way that's more expensive. So our RPA is going to be a key. It's going to become absolutely key. So mentioned application programming interfaces because this is the mechanism largely by which the software systems talk to each other. And again, sort of, it follows the kind of mantra of, when you realise it's software, it all becomes a lot more simple. So it's an interface by which an application accesses other software. It can be a different operating system, which is API portability. It can work with software in another language, which can be compatibility. And APIs, they are essentially rule sets or protocols that need to be complied with for one software to speak to another software. And APIs can be in documentary form, so if you write software that conforms with a written spec, then the two bits of software will talk to each other. Or the API itself can be software tools and routines, or a combination of the two. So an API itself may be licensable software. Now, because its purpose is communication, people are generally reasonably relaxed about the extent that you can connect two bits of software using the API. But some APIs can be restrictive, and again, it's another example of licensing that you need to look at. So here we've got, the way this tends to work is through web services and a data feed in the cloud sense. So key issues, do you need a license for the API? If you have a license, does it let you do what you want to do? Are there any knock-on effects in licensing terms with what the API connects at both ends or whatever? APIs are built around standards. The world of the cloud and mobile is built around interoperability and standards, and those standards may change. So do you need to keep tabs on those as well? Software-oriented architecture, SOA, again, is becoming a very, very common development tool for software in the cloud and mobile world. It's a fancy name for saying, here's a menu of stuff that the software does, and you, Mr. Customer, can pick what you like from the menu, and you can have your meal, and you can choose the software. So SOA is architected or built on associating or orienting the customer's required business processes, services, with the supplier's software. So the way this happens is that there is a menu of software applications that the customer can choose from, and they are what's known as orchestrated. So they're selected and sequenced for the customer. And then in the middle of the sandwich, if you like, there's an enterprise service bus, an ESB, which is middleware that actually does the job. It's like a traffic cop. It sort of takes that bit, sticks it down that road, takes that bit, sticks it down that road, makes sure it all happens in the right time, in the right order, and integrates the software that's been selected to meet the customer functions. So this is very much, it's very much a software deployment and delivery technique. It will be used in robotic process automation, where we saw you're kind of translating the processes from people to software, and SOA is a particularly good technique for doing this. But all the while, we're seeing lots of different types of software being used in lots of different types of ways. And RPA processes may be AI, they may be in the cloud, so one's going to have to get used to thinking about all these things and how they work together. So again, key licensing issues, does the SOA agreement or license permit interaction with other software outside the SOA? How does that work? Change and development in flight, these contracts will always change, the customer's software needs will always develop. Smart contracts, again, something that we're hearing quite a lot of, and you know, the way to think about it, speaking to lawyers, is to say, think Chitty-on contracts in code as a blockchain application. So it represents a self-executing contract as an arrangement that the software can make, verify, execute, and enforce automatically under terms set in advance. So you may have a chain of these contracts. It could be insurance, it could be property which is being sold, it could, and you may have a chain of contracts, each one of which is interdependent. I won't go into the blockchain part of it in a lot of detail, but basically, as a business-to-business user, you will be seeing this as a mechanism for making and executing many contracts. So how far does the user's license extend? To what extent are you interdependent on a contract that's been executed maybe hundreds of iterations away? And how does your smart contract system interoperate or communicate with other types of software? And is this something that is permitted under the license agreement? So if I'm not taking these in any particular order, but if smart contracts are at a very early stage, then open source software is mainstream and mature. It's software provided under a license that meets the three requirements of the open source definition. It's redistributable without payment, it's redistributable with the source code, and modification and distribution of the permitted works, of derived works, is permitted. And again, what people get concerned about is the inheritance requirement of certain types of open source license, so particularly the GPL and the LGPL. And there are increasingly cases that, mainly in the States and Germany, that say the inheritance requirements of the GPL and LGPL and certain allied licenses are enforceable. So it sort of swells this theme of the courts looking at these license agreements and saying, yeah, these work on their terms, and we can sort of put four corners around it. A key thing to remember with open source is it's not the software that's different. The software can be the same under a proprietary or an open source license, but it's the license wrapper itself. Most open source licenses are permissive in that they don't have this inheritance requirement. But where you do have an inheritance requirement, it means that software that you develop that interacts with the copyleft software, open source software that you're using, could itself inherit that copyleft requirement. So again, open source powers the cloud. Hadoop, big data, most software in the cloud is open source. So if you're using copyleft software, and the most common types are the GPL and the LGPL, then you'll need to bear this in mind, because this sort of touches on license scope clauses as well. Finally, I just wanted to say a word about algorithms, because this is, again, something that is sort of kind of the techies use to kind of bedazzle us poor lawyers. I always think of it as a maths formula, nothing more or else, nothing more or less. So the area of a circle is pi r squared is an algorithm, or it's a series of steps to get to a predetermined outcome. And there's this buying a lamp here. So lamp doesn't work. Lamp plugged in, bulb burned out, buy new lamp. That is an algorithm. I think sort of reducing it to what these things are and what they aren't. So the way the FTSE works in terms of computation indices is an algorithm which is published. I mean, this is a complex one. The algorithm, it could be a copyright work potentially. It could be subject to confidential information. Where it's published, it won't be. But the software embodiment of the algorithm will be a copyright work. So, and that can be licensed in a way like any other software as a copyright work. And how is it used? How's the input data? How's output data? How does all that work in relation to the algorithm? So an algorithm won't be used by itself, it'll be used with other systems. But again, this is a piece of this puzzle when we're looking at the license scope clause. So this sort of circles back to the slide at the start. All this stuff is a puzzle, can be a puzzle when it comes to your desk. I think you just realise that it's software. But what we'll be seeing with all of these things, each of these little blocks will be happening more and more. And perhaps more importantly still, they'll all be interacting with each other. So we're in this phase of huge movement to the cloud, huge development of data centers, huge workloads that were done in-house, on-prem, going out to the cloud. And you've got the considerations there around the nature of the service subscription agreement, how long it lasts for. You've got AI, which will be taking off. We've sort of looked at it in passing in a legal context. But you think of the translation AI, you think of digital assistants, you think of smart cities, keeping the lights on. This is going to get more important. RPA, replacing stuff that people do with stuff that software does, that's going to get more important. And particularly there, you have software interacting with other software systems that could be very, very far away. APIs are what let them all work together. SOI is the technique by which a lot of RPA will be happening. It's this idea of the customer choosing from the menu and then the ESB going out into the kitchen and making it all happen. Smart contracts we'll be seeing more of. Open source I put there for completeness, but open source in the mainstream it's going to be covering most stuff. So there's quite a lot there that we've covered today. But I sort of want to bring it back to the start point a little bit, which basically we're all going to need to look at the license scope clause with a little bit more detail than we have been for these three reasons. Vendors are becoming more aggressive about over-deployment. They see this as a good way of getting revenues, if not revenues, then as enhancing their land grab that I think we were talking about in the interval. And there are more cases showing that these licenses are enforceable in accordance with their terms. There's SAP and Diageo. We've had a number of examples where clients have been entered into, perhaps on a click-wrap basis, with licenses that look simple. When you get into the clauses, they are obscure, they can be very poorly drafted. One doesn't think that it's deliberate, more kind of cock-up than conspiracy, but it gets you to the same place, because to reverse out that software and replace it with something else can be very expensive in terms of development. So it may be, you may feel it's unattractive to have to pay the extra license fees, but that may be the lesser of the two evils. So both in the open source world and in SAP and Diageo, licensors are having some success in enforcing license scope clauses. And technically, we've got this plethora of new software deployment and software delivery techniques as just sort of software starts to do much more in our daily lives. So all of this makes the clearly drafted license scope terms critical. So right at the start, the mantra to leave you with, if you like, is in your looking at your software licenses, that the use case should be aligned to the license scope terms over the contract life cycle. So that means that when you're looking at the license agreement, you need to understand what use the business is going to be making of it in flight over the contract life cycle. And you may not know that at the start. So what happens where you don't know, but you know this is going to be a key bit of software, and it could be working with lots of other things? Well, you need to try and give yourself as broad license rights as possible. And that's going to be definitely a negotiation point with the vendor. So, greater risks for licenses in flight. Software license non-compliant through over-deployment is inefficient. It risks extra charges, not only license fees, but legal and management time. It can result in a delay to a critical timeline in getting that project. As Deirdre said, you may have an audit down the line, which you may have given away more rights than perhaps you wanted to. And at the end of it, the vendors aren't keen to litigate because this is inefficient from their point of view as well. But they will use this leverage that they've got, and there is a sort of groundswell of growing leverage to enforce their terms. And if you can avoid this unattractive choice between budgeted expense and removing the offending software, that's not the worst that can happen, but it's a good example of things to avoid. So from the customer's point of view, the use cases for the software will become more interdependent. Align use case to license scope terms over contract life cycle. We're starting to see customers deploying structured asset management processes and license compliance tools so that they know what in their software estate is working with what and how it's operating. And spare a thought for the vendors as well. Very often you get a license agreement which is well drafted, it may be restrictively drafted, but it actually contains nothing about the pricing. And then you've got to look at the schedule, the statement of work, or the fees schedule. And that can be very poorly drafted. It can be very difficult to understand how much you've got to pay, particularly with the ERP vendors like Oracle and like SAP. So I think that there's an onus on them to communicate their license scope clearly in their business documents. And then, as ever, when we're looking at contracts, it's not necessarily the front end. It's really how the front end T's and C's integrate, dovetail with the back end commercial piece. And it's really important that the business guys understand how this works and how it operates. And then, their mantra has been for a long time, trust but verify, but they are getting much more assiduous in verification. So I think the key takeaway bringing this all together is align use case to license scope terms over the contract lifecycle.